Destination Medicine is a collaborative initiative of regional training hubs. With first-hand lessons learned from those who have gone before, this podcast is designed to assist and inspire anyone interested in pursuing a medical career in rural and regional Australia. Welcome to Destination Medicine. I'm Peter Lance. Dr. Anna Weston had already taken an unusual path when Kalgoorlie called. She'd been a graphic designer for more than a decade before choosing to study medicine. Then, with 3 young children and a husband in tow, she moved into the life of a rural generalist in this remote WA city. It's an inspiring story of perseverance that has resulted in a dream country career. Anna starts by describing her early career choices to Nicole Goodman.
It wasn't something I decided when I was young. In fact, I actively didn't want to do medicine when I finished high school. I had the marks for it, but just didn't think it was the path for me. I was interested in biomedical science, but at the time was also really interested in graphic design. And it was actually a chemistry teacher who said to us in year 11, you should choose what you love, not necessarily what you're good at. And I think I also thought I'd shock my parents a bit by deciding to do graphic design. So
why is that?
Well, just because it wasn't as academic, and they were never pushy, but, always encouraged me to do my best. And so, I think teenage me thought I'd go for a bit of the shock factor. I was a little disappointed when they weren't super shocked. And at the end of the day, they just wanted me to pursue whatever I was, most comfortable and most passionate about. So, went into a career in graphic design first, which was really great. And then kind of fast forward a couple of decades through graphic design, moving from Melbourne to Perth, working for Coca-Cola for over a decade, really with that passion, and then a marketing degree as well. And then I had kids and had a few other big health things happen in our family. Mum was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And it became really apparent that even though what I'd loved before had been great and served me quite well, if I was going to decide to be away from the kids, and I knew I needed some balance, I still needed, a part of life that was me and not focused just on my kids, even though they're fantastic. So it just was kind of something that grew at that stage. And I thought, maybe actually I would like to get involved in medicine. And I happened to reconnect with someone who had originally done graphic design with me. It turned out she'd then gone on and changed careers. And when I reconnected with her, she was about to become a junior doctor. So it was quite a pivotal moment because I really didn't think it was something I could do, already being in my 30s. I thought it would be too much. I didn't think I would get in. But her encouragement really to say, look, just go in and have a go. And so I applied. It took me a couple of years to get in. But the rest of that's history. And so now I'm just commencing my 3rd postgraduate year. So my 3rd year is actually being a doctor. And there's certainly been challenges along the way, but I haven't looked back from that point.
Yeah, that's amazing. What an interesting trajectory from graphic design to medicine. What was the approach of yourself and the family to this change?
To be honest, I have to say for a good couple of years, it did feel like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that meme, that cartoon of Homer Simpson moving backwards into a hedge.
Yes.
Kind of a bit of going through the hedge backwards, a little bit of a disappearing act. I feel like we kind of flew by the seat of our pants for a good amount of time. And there were definitely times, particularly in the preclinical years of medicine and before moving rurally, where, days did feel like Groundhog Day. I was having to get up. My husband was having to get up, get the kids ready, get out the door. He needed to go to his job. I had to get to lectures and then do it all again the next day. It was exhausting. It was mentally tough. And there were definitely times where I questioned whether it was a good idea. And COVID happened in the middle of that too. So at the start of my 2nd year of study, we went from being face-to-face to a lot of online learning, which I guess in some ways for me kind of worked because it took a lot of that commute out. But it made for a few fairly hairy situations of being on Zoom calls with, a half-naked child suddenly running into the back of the screen. Or some screaming, having to mute really quickly and say to all of my classmates, I'm really sorry, I'm just going to have to go and deal with that toddler. I'll be back in a second. But it's kind of all been part of the circus. And in a lot of ways, I actually think it sets you up well for dealing with a ward of individual patients who are all on their own journey. Some people who unfortunately aren't coping very well, older people who may be sundowning, all sorts of like the chaos that can just kick off, you know, in the hospital environment or the ED environment, particularly at any time. I wouldn't go back to those early days of training, but I'm glad that I did it. Like, I've never had any regrets in changing. It is really important, I think, when you're having to make that decision to not be around your kids all the time, that you're not only feeling personally enriched by what you're doing, but actually feeling like you're contributing to something bigger. And graphic design just wasn't delivering that anymore. Marketing wasn't delivering that anymore, whereas medicine kind of always does. It always has to.
And so how did you then come to practice rurally in Kalgoorlie, of all places?
When I was in second year, I applied for the penultimate year program. So that's normally a program in your second to last year of medicine where you can go rurally for a year. I actually wasn't accepted in the first round. And it was only, I think, at that point that I realised how much I was invested in wanting to have a go at working rurally. Part of that was because of our family backgrounds. So my husband was born in Esperance and grew up living all around regional WA. And it turned out he'd actually lived quite close to Kalgoorlie for a little while he was a teenager. And so he'd been trying to get me to go rural for a while whilst I was still in my old career. And at one stage, it actually suggested we move to Kalgoorlie. And I'd sort of said to him, like, where's that? No way. So something eventually had hit home that perhaps, you know, moving to the country, moving the kids to the country might be something that would provide different opportunities. And I'd certainly heard that rural medicine, particularly when you're a training doctor, gives you some opportunities that you won't get in the city because there's smaller teams, there's less resource, so you actually have to upskill a lot faster. And so that kind of attracted me to doing that. After I didn't get in, like I said, quite devastated, and then a week before we started third year, I, out of the blue, got a phone call from Rhonda Worthington at the clinical school to say, hey, actually, we've just had someone pull out. There's a spot. It's in Kalgoorlie. None of them at the clinical school thought I would take it. In fact, Rhonda tells a story of them talking in the office about, you know, oh, the next person on the list has 3 little kids. There's no way she's going to say yes. But I think my response to Rhonda was, oh, look, could you just give me half an hour to think about it? And, you know, initially even my husband was like, well, we can't make this work. This is far too little notice. And, you know, I said, okay, what would be the downside if we give this a go? And there were really no downsides. If it hadn't worked for us, I could have gone back to just completing third year with my home university. So, yeah, I packed up with a few days' notice, left my husband and the kids in Perth with you know, I'll be back in a few weeks and then we'll see what will happen. And off I went. And I was only here a couple of days before really realising I thought it would make sense for the family to be out here, and that the things that my husband had been trying to get me to see about rural life were definitely evident just from rolling into town. So very quickly made the call to say to him, you know, well, look, how about we try and move up here? We bought a house. It was a lot cheaper actually than renting, and the real estate up here was quite reasonable. So we were able to do that, fortunately. So by, I think, about mid-April, the whole family had moved up to here. And Kalgoorlie may not be forever, but it's certainly for now.
Yeah, what a journey you've had. You said as soon as you arrived in Kalgoorlie that the benefits almost jumped out straight away. Can you tell us a little bit about what those were and kind of what you've enjoyed most about working and living in Kalgoorlie? I
think what really struck me was the peace and quiet. And I know some people would say Kalgoorlie is not peaceful and quiet, but overall it is. There was open space. I'd just driven through 600 kilometres of desert, and yet there were green playing fields. There were wide streets. There were beautifully epic sunsets. And I know nothing beats looking at a sunset over the water, but the colours that we get in the sunset out here, and you can hear yourself think, but it's just, the place is still just big enough. You know, it's a big regional centre. There's nearly 30,000 people out here. Yes, some of that's a transient population. There's a lot of FIFO, but you can pretty much get everything you still need. So it's a really good combination of the things you need from the city, but with enough space to be able to enjoy life as well. And I'm only ever 5 minutes from work or from home. Whereas being in the city, and I did do a little bit of city practice in internship, it's 45 minutes an hour either way to go from most of the hospitals to where our Perth house is. So that's time you just don't get back. The kids have settled into school really well out here. We haven't found any reduction in their access to really great opportunities academically. None of them have really been big on sport, but certainly for anyone who's got kids who are well into sport, there's a ton of different really active sporting clubs, including a triathlon club, which is kind of amazing considering as we don't have water. Like, that's the one thing we don't have.
So where does the water component come in triathlon?
Look, there is definitely a big outdoor pool here, or indoor outdoor pool, and everyone kind of considers Esperance to be our beach, which at 4 hours away is still not local. But the yardstick is kind of that anything that is closer than Perth, which is 6 hours, is, therefore close. So, yeah, I think there's quite a few trips to Esperance made by those guys. Yeah.
Got it. All right. So tell us a little bit about your current role and what you're doing in Kalgoorlie now.
Yeah. So I'm actually about to transition roles. I've spent the last 12 months in the hospital working in the emergency department as an RMO, my first year of being an RMO. I've done that in a 0.5 capacity, so that's been 2 days a week. And then another 2 days a week, I've been with the rural clinical school, so gone back to who helped me to get through medicine and graduate as an MC, which is a medical coordinator, which translates really to a senior lecturer. So that has enabled me to help to train, the next load of junior doctors coming through, and also keep my own skills sharp, because if you're going to be teaching medical students, you want to be pretty sure that what you're teaching them is pretty accurate.
Absolutely.
And that's been a really great balance. And then I've had a day a week off. Coming into this year, because I'm also a rural generalist trainee, I've decided to embark upon my advanced skills training year. So in a couple of weeks, I'm moving into the obstetrics and gynecology department as one of their registrars, which is really exciting, but it's a big step. I'm really passionate about obs-gyn, and I think that's, really the niche that I want to get into eventually. So that's what's prompted me to do that. I wasn't planning necessarily to do my advanced skill this early, but the opportunities presented itself. So I'm just going to jump in and see what happens.
As you say, you're very passionate about obstetrics. How does that fit in with following a rural generalist pathway? So one of the greatest benefits of the pathway to rural generalism is it allows you to still sample all parts of medicine. Part of it is having an advanced skill, and that's what I'm planning to pursue going into specialist training in obstetrics, but I will also still maintain, retain, build on other generalist medicine skills. So that will still allow me to have a great variety in terms of perhaps doing some hospital work or some GP work, perhaps still in emergency or in other areas, but then have that honed skill in obstetrics as well. And I think that's what's fantastic about rural generalism is it sets you up to still be able to operate in so many different areas of medicine rather than getting into a niche. And there's nothing wrong with people who want to be very focused in one area. But thinking down the track 10, 15 years, the idea of rural generalism is that whilst I should be exceptional at catching babies, should an ambulance come by to a rural ED with someone who's having a cardiac arrest, I still will have maintained at least enough skill to be able to start to help that person rather than saying, I don't even remember what the advanced life support algorithm is. So, yeah, and I'm keen to do that. I think it gives you that opportunity to say, okay, this is what I think I'm really interested in right now, but there is still more out there, and perhaps my tastes and what I'm passionate about and what I'm best at in medicine is going to change over time. Is there a piece of advice that you've received during your training that's made a significant difference to your experience, do you think?
So as I mentioned, I'm stepping into this new exciting but also scary role of registrar training in obstetrics and gynae this year. And in deciding to take that up, there was a bit of a stumbling block for me because I'm also still really passionate about medical education and have really enjoyed the connection I've made now being on the flip side in the clinical school to being a lecturer. And I really didn't want to lose that. And that, for the second time, really, after trying to rock the boat and stay in Kalgoorlie for internship, meant that I was asking for people to step outside their comfort zone and perhaps let me do an unorthodox way of approaching what I wanted to do. And most people were really on board with the idea of being part-time in both of those arenas, but that was a little bit unusual for some of the decision makers. And so I felt quite uncomfortable in approaching some really senior people to say, look, would it be okay, to do things a little bit differently, to slow my training down and do that over 2 years, whereas normally you're expected to do your advanced skill in 1 year, but also so I can continue this link with medical education, which is really important to me. And I think really important to rural medicine because there's not a ton of people who've got the time to be teaching. If we don't have the teachers to continue to have medical students in the rural area, then we lose one of the biggest pipelines to actually encouraging people to go rural in their early medical careers. A particular mentor that I approached about this and sort of posed this quandary to was really effective in saying, look, at the end of the day, you really need to decide what it is that you're passionate about and how this is going to work best for you and stick to that. And so when you find people who say, no, we don't think this will work, keep saying, well, why not? Surely there is a way to make this work. And that person was absolutely right. And even just that person saying to me, work it out what it is going to work for you and what's important for you first, and then go from there, helped give me that clarity to say, yeah, actually, I do think it's entirely reasonable to make this request of the system. For the system, in 2025, with all that's happened in the last few years, with changes of working modalities, with COVID, etc., to be able to say we can probably be flexible in this way. And we've been able to find a way to make that work. So I will be 4 days a week training in Obsgyne and then 1 day a week still with the clinical school with that breadth of generalist teaching and that range of medical skills as well. And in having said this, it's not me saying, people should just be able to do whatever they like. That's not the message here. But the message I'm hoping that comes across is that if you can see something that's going to benefit not only you, but a system, it's going to allow you to give back to other aspects that you find really important, that it's worthwhile pursuing that. And I think you'll find that people will come on board that journey with you, see your vision, and then also want to make that happen. And then that paves the way for other people who also might have felt the same way but didn't feel empowered to be able to suggest a new way of working.
You mentioned a mentor. What's been the role of mentors and mentorship in your experience?
My experience has been that mentorship, when I've tried to formally seek out a mentor, doesn't really work. The people that I would consider to be my greatest mentors have sort of organically fallen into that role. And generally it started as being a collegiate relationship. Sometimes they've been people who've been in senior positions to me, or sometimes they've been people who have been in a similar ranking position to me. But over time, they've shown themselves to be wise, worldly, people I resonate with, and whose advice is consistent and also seems to steer me on the right path. So rather than having a set, time to check in with these people or actually ever having formalized that mentor relationship, like I said, it's just happened a lot more organically. They're also the people that I wouldn't hesitate to invite around for a barbecue. So they're people that I connect with on many different levels.
Tell me, what type of personal qualities do you think are advantageous to working in rural and remote medicine?
I think you have to be flexible and adaptable. And I think you have to like a sense of the unknown and a sense of sometimes flying by the seat of your pants. You have to be prepared to jump in and have a go, even if you're not feeling full bottle in a situation, feeling quite vulnerable, feeling like you might make a mistake. Let's put it this way. There are times in rural medicine where patients outnumber the doctors, and we still have to be able to provide a good quality service. So whilst you might not be 100% on the best way to handle a cardiac arrest. You've got a good general knowledge. There are other people around that you can ask for help. And even though they might not be standing beside you, they might be on the end of a telephone. But the point is you can't do nothing. You have to get in and do something, and something is always going to be better than standing there in fear and going, okay, well, we just can't do this.
What you're really talking about is opportunities that become, people in metro areas just might not get, simply by virtue of the fact, as you've said, patients outnumber doctors. And so it's all hands on deck.
Yeah, it's absolutely one of the opportunities that is quite unique to rural medicine. If I think about actually a conversation I had with some metro colleagues the other day, and a friend of mine was expressing that he was quite disappointed in some of the rotations that he'd done last year. He'd deliberately stayed metro and gone into some more niche areas, thinking that he might pick up some really important skills that he could take later into rural medicine, because he's also planning to move into a rural career. But unfortunately, he found that the landscape in the metro area was that there are so many levels of people. So you've got interns, you've got RMOs, you've got junior registrars, senior registrars, fellows, advanced trainees, and all of those people are vying to get more unique experiences, meaning that for even some fairly basic procedures, you sometimes 10th down the line of people putting their hands up to want to get in and have a go. And of course, people who are approaching exams are going to get preference over people who are more junior. Whereas that doesn't happen rurally, because there aren't 10 people in the queue. Sometimes there's one of you, or there's two of you, or there's whoever's happened to be available to attend to the code blue. And so, you're in, you're it. And yes, there's someone to guide you most of the time. We still definitely have senior doctors, but firstly, that hesitation has to be removed because you have to do it. But then that experience of being in that pressure situation actually means that your learning's enhanced, because you have that whole experience of the situation to frame in your head and your memory of, okay, how did I approach this? I approached it under pressure. This is how it went. Normally things actually go pretty well. And could I do it again? Well, actually, yes, I could, because I didn't get to stand on the edge of the pool and decide not to jump in today. I just had to go, and I survived.
Yeah, that's right. It's that baptism of fire piece, and, being thrown in the deep end, essentially, like you said. No experience is better than that, really, and you kind of never forget. So I guess with all of that in mind, what advice would you give to a student or a junior medical officer considering a career as a rural generalist training in Kalgoorlie?
In terms of Kalgoorlie, please just come here and see it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't speak to too many people in the metro area. I wouldn't watch Kalgoorlie cops on the TV. Just come and see it, because there is a massive difference between how a place is portrayed and then what it is like in real life. And I think that's probably true of most places, but Kalgoorlie traditionally gets a pretty bad rap. And full disclosure, it was one of the things that had prevented me from coming here back when my husband suggested coming here, years and years ago. Kalgoorlie Hospital is a large regional hospital. We have most of the major specialties out here. Case in point being that I'm able to do my obstetrics training here with very limited need to actually go anywhere else to fill in the gaps, which is fantastic. And one thing that some other junior doctors may not know is that there is additional support available for their families, either through the individual hospitals or through regional training hubs or through the rural clinical school, to provide help for their spouses to actually find employment if they need that out in the areas. And I think the training colleges might also have similar supports available. So I certainly encourage anyone who's thinking, it sounds like a great opportunity, but I'm not sure that my spouse is going to be able to find work, to ask those questions, because there is actually quite a lot of career guidance and help available there too.
Such an important point.
For people like me coming into medicine who've already got a family, there's really no barriers to coming out here. The hardest thing is just making that leap and deciding to go. If you've got kids who are primary school age, it's fantastic. They're not going to miss out on anything. There are a number of excellent primary schools in the area. Most of them are public schools. A personal example, my 11-year-old son actually just got back from Japan on an elective school camp, and he'd been of my 3 kids, the most reluctant to leave the metropolitan area. Being a little bit older, he'd established some friendship networks and was, really sad to be stepping away from that. I reminded him once he got back from Japan that that was an opportunity unique to going to school out here and to a particular passionate Japanese teacher who has been Kalgoorlie local for decades. He wouldn't have got that opportunity if he'd been at his metro-based primary school. And that really hit home for him in that sometimes going somewhere where you don't expect to have great opportunities can lead to really great things. And yeah, that was something very unique to the experience of coming out here. The other thing for people coming out who've got families is, as I touched on before, your proximity to home and work. The hospital's in the middle of town. Even if you were to live on the outskirts of town, at the most you're a 10-minute car ride away from your kids at home or your kids at school. So you just don't have that stressful time of having to make sure you're out on time, run to get your kids from daycare or from after-school care to avoid paying the extra fees, then sitting in traffic for 3/4 of an hour only to get home, dinner, bath, bed, rinse, repeat. Like all of that stuff is removed. And that stress, the stress that comes with having to do that is removed as well. So that means you still got something in the tank when you go home to your family in the evening to be able to spend a bit of time with them. And it's also not dark because you only actually left work 5 minutes ago. So yeah, that's something that, you just don't get to replicate in the city. It's something that's quite unique to being in a rural context. And we don't get that time back with our kids being young. And so I think it's something that people really need to embrace the tree change.
Dr. Anna Weston, a rural generalist doctor based in Kalgoorlie, Western Australia. This is Destination Medicine. Thanks for listening. Regional training hubs are supported by funding from the Australian Government under the Rural Health Multidisciplinary Training Program.